Hey, what's going on, guys? Tyler here, aka Very Nice Player, aka the LoL Philosopher, and welcome to the Theory of Ranked. This is going to be the first video in a series dedicated to helping you guys achieve a higher level of performance in ranked League of Legends games, and in turn, climb the ladder of solo queue while being more content doing it. So my background is I'm a professional poker player. I also play League of Legends, and a lot of the subjects I've researched when it comes to poker performance directly translate to League of Legends, and I would like to share this information with you guys. Eventually, I would like to work with pro players on a one-on-one basis, try and help them achieve new levels of success. But for right now, I'm going to be making a series dedicated to you guys, the average viewer, and helping you enjoy your solo queue experience more because you'll be playing better. You'll be looking at the game differently, more optimally. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this one. This one's going to be a very fundamental video. I'm just going to be walking you guys through the philosophy of ranked play, introducing you guys to some terms you may not have heard before related to game theory, and we're going to get a general understanding of ranked games so that everybody's sort of on an even playing field. And then as we dive deeper and we get more technical, nobody will be lost. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this one. So first things first, let's go ahead and talk about the average player in League of Legends. The whole goal of the ranked system in League of Legends is to place you where your win rate is 50%. So if your win rate is 50% in Gold 1, that means that you are an average Gold 1 player. This obviously means that if you get your win rate over 50%, then you will climb in rank, right? Everybody knows this. The important thing to keep in mind is that variance greatly affects a 51% win rate. It affects it much more than, say, a 60% win rate. And because the volume is so low in League of Legends, you only get to play maybe 500, 600, even up to 1,000 games of ranked in a season if you're not a pro player or you're not very dedicated, then you are at the mercy of variance when you have a low win rate. So our goal is going to be to maximize our edge so that A, we climb more, more ranks net, but also we climb faster because variance will be lower. We will converge to our actual rank quicker, and this in turn leads to less frustration when you're playing the game. So just to show you guys here, this is what a 55% win rate looks like in terms of variance. So like I said, I'm a professional poker player. This is about a month of games that I played last year, and these games are actually very similar to a solo queue League of Legends game. These are double or nothing sit and goes, and essentially my win rate in every single game I play is about 55%, which means it's very similar to playing a League of Legends game at your correct elo with a champion you're very, very good at. So 55% win rate. Looking at this, you can see there are some times where, these are $50 games by the way, there are times where I would go on 20-game losing streaks, even though my win rate did not change in terms of my expected win rate. My actual win rate did, and this is just variance, and it's something that's very hard to deal with if you don't have experience with it. And part of the reason I think I just understand how League of Legends works a little bit better than the average player. You can see here, imagine these are solo queue games. This is a huge downswing, right? And my win rate did not change. My win rate going into each game was still 55%. I just got unlucky. So in other words, you could probably assume that a lot of these downswings involve a lot of AFK players and a lot of feeders, right? But then I go on these upswings where maybe I didn't get an AFK in my game. So this is important to keep in mind in the back of your head. This is what variance looks like for a player who is playing above their current level, but not by a lot, which is going to be most players. You can't just decide you want to climb and suddenly get an 80% win rate like a pro player who's smurfing. And the reason why you can't is because you haven't built up what's called the mechanical or strategic asymmetries yet. But we're going to talk about that in a moment. First, let's kind of expand on this idea of variance. So how do you maximize your win rate in a game of League of Legends? Well, the answer is you first need to recognize what you can control and what you can't control. One thing that really, I think, puts a lot of players into the wrong mentality in solo queue is this idea that you could have carried harder. Right? I go on these live streams from pro players and I see people ask questions like, well, I played really, really good this game, but my top laner just fed out of his mind and I lost the game. What could I have done differently? Well, a pro player might say you should have tried to carry harder. Don't focus on your teammates. You need to carry harder. And this mentality breeds seriously unrealistic expectations. Look, here's the basic fact of the situation. If you lose a game of League of Legends, chances are it wasn't your fault. It was probably your teammates' fault. There's 5 people on a team. If everybody was of an equal skill level, there's only a 20% chance that you played worse than everybody else that game. So blaming your teammates normally is a very realistic and valid option. However, you don't want to blame them in chat, and the reason why is because A, it makes them play worse, but also B, it makes you play worse, and C, there's really no reason to get mad because of this fact. That's just how the League of Legends rank system works. Every single game, one team is going to be better than the other, but your team is going to be better just as often as it's worse. It's not like you get all the feeders and nobody else does, and that's why you're still bronze, right? Everybody gets the same amount of feeders, whether it's the enemy team or your team. Everybody gets the same amount of AFKs, of smurfs, of people throwing the game. So none of that matters. It becomes a wash in the long run. The only factor that determines your win rate is your own performance as it compares to the pool of players playing in that exact same situation. Now, this is kind of a very ambiguous topic, and I know it takes a little bit to wrap your head around because pro players will always tell you, just focus on your lane matchup, right? Just focus on beating your opponent in lane. Well, that's not actually how it works, right? We all know this because, for example, some matchups naturally lose in lane, but then let's say go on to crush late game team fights. Like a good example might be just in general, Jinx versus like a Caitlyn lane, right? Jinx will crush the late game team fights, but will get poked out of lane quite easily. So in that situation, you don't really want to compare yourself to your lane opponent, and you never do, right? You might be the Caitlyn, and you might crush lane but lose the game, and that does not necessarily mean that you played optimally, right? Because what you need to do is compare how you play to the other players in the pool who are playing that champion. And by the pool, I mean in your elo. So if you play better than the average Caitlyn player does, that's all that matters. And what that leads to is building up something called asymmetries. So the self-centered approach essentially breaks down into you should be focusing entirely on your own game and building up things called asymmetries. An asymmetry is simply something that you do that somebody else in your position wouldn't. So a good example of an asymmetry is a pro player might get 200 CS at 20 minutes in this situation, whereas if you were in that situation, you might only get 100. That's a big example of a mechanical asymmetry. And all these little asymmetries, all the things that you do better than the average player at your elo in your situation is what causes your win rate to go up. This is how you determine the expected win rate of a certain strategy. So examples of mechanical asymmetries are solo killing somebody. If you solo kill somebody with a certain champion 7 out of 10 times, whereas the average player on that champion in your elo only solo kills 5 out of 10 times, that's a mechanical asymmetry. That means that your win rate goes up by maybe 1%. CS in lane, like I already mentioned, is a huge example of a mechanical asymmetry. Using and dodging skill shots. If you dodge the Amumu tongue as the ADC 6 out of 10 times, whereas the average player in your elo only does it 2 out of 10 times, That's a huge example of a mechanical asymmetry, because the effect that has on the game itself can be massive. If one of those tongues from a Mumu is in the late game when both teams have an open nexus, that right there is a huge example of a mechanical asymmetry. Your win rate will skyrocket if you never get hit by that skill shot when it really matters. Positioning in team fights, targeting in team fights are huge examples of opportunities for mechanical asymmetries. If you never get caught in the Amumu ult, whereas your opponent does 3 out of 10 times, that's a huge example of mechanical asymmetry. And all these little advantages add up to your win rate. And when you take every single advantage you can possibly have, that's when you can become like a pro player who's smurfing. You can reach that 90% win rate against players who don't take any of the advantages, such as bronze players. Strategic asymmetries don't matter as much for lower elo, except for champion picks and item builds. Champion picks are hugely important. I'll get into that in a little bit. Dragon/Baron calls. These are important for higher elos where your team is really going to need to be more coordinated because the enemy team will be looking for picks and will be rotating around the map. The best way to train Dragon and Baron calls is through VOD review. I'll be talking about that more specifically in future videos. Ward placement, very important. If your team has better wards, you'll get more picks, which leads to more objectives, and it snowballs from there. Big example of a potential strategic asymmetry. Map trades and rotations, once again, more important at higher elo, and very important you review the VODs and take a look at where you can potentially out-trade your opponents and build up a strategic asymmetry. Like I said, every single action, every decision you can make in the game is a potential for an asymmetry. It's a potential for you to do something that the average player in your position, in your elo, would not do. And when you add all that up, that's how you grow your win rate. All right, so now that we have this information available in our arsenal, how do we maximize our edge in a solo queue game? Well, I've laid it out very simply for you into a couple of points. Number 1, pick a champion that is strong in the meta and at your elo. This is unbelievably important, and it's the reason that even players who spend a lot of time on a certain champion may not climb as fast as they could. Let's say that you pick a champion and you're going to really stick to it and you're just going to spam it in solo queue for like 3 months straight, barring no changes to the champion in the meta. Would you want to do that on a champion that organically has a 45% win rate, or would you want to do it on one that has a 55% win rate? Of course you want to do it on the one with a 55% win rate, because what that means is, let's say you build up a 10% win rate over that time. So you go from a champion that started at 55 and goes up to 65, whereas if you take the other champion, you go from 45 to 55, which is just where you started with the other champion. Don't make it harder for yourself. This leads to frustration. Pick a champion that organically has a high win rate for an average player, and then build up the asymmetries. Next, like I said, create the mechanical asymmetries. This just comes through practice. Next video, we're going to look at very specific examples of how to build up asymmetries on certain champions and in different roles. But for now, just recognize the way you do it is through repetition and through practice. You can see over here on the right, when I decided I wanted to climb, I said, I'm going to pick a champion who's strong in the current meta, has a good win rate, like Jinx, and then I'm going to build the mechanical asymmetries. I'm going to get better CS than the average Jinx player does. I'm at my elo. I'm going to team fight better than the average Jinx does at my elo. I put almost no practice into this, and you can just see what happens when you build up the mechanical asymmetries. Super important that you stick to a champion, because let's say I want to climb. I would just keep playing Jinx, but as soon as I stop playing Jinx, let's say I go play a different champion who I haven't played very many games on, my win rate might go from 57, 58% down to 48%, where I'm not even climbing anymore, and I'm actually undoing all the work I did. This is why players get stuck. They play too many champions, and the ones that they do play are not strong picks in the meta. They play more fun champions. If your goal is to have fun, it doesn't matter what champion you play. If you want to climb, you need to make a strong pick, and you need to only play that champion. It's not important to focus on champion pool until you get to higher elos. create strategic asymmetries through VOD review. I already kind of mentioned this. We're going to look at this more in the future. This is more for high-level players, learning Baron calls, when to make good ones, dragon calls, map rotations, certain ward placements with higher success. All of that's important, but we're not going super deep in this video. This is really more of just a surface, high-level video about the philosophy of improving. So once again, create those asymmetries through VOD review. Use throwaway games for practice. Number one, and I tell this to everybody, type /mute all as soon as any game begins if you are below Diamond Elo, possibly even in Diamond Elo, because the chat is destructive. It lowers, I bet if you type that, we would see a 2% increase in your win rate naturally, just from all of my experience with the game and talking to players about it. Just type /mute all before every game. Use pings. It works perfectly fine. Use these throwaway games where somebody's AFK or somebody's just running down mid feeding to focus on building your mechanical asymmetries. Focus on making your CS a little bit better by just really trying to get every single one. Focus on your attack moving and trying to really smooth that out if you're playing ADC. Focus on ward placement, specifically trying out maybe some new locations and seeing how those work if you're a support player. But make sure that you're being constructive with these bad games and you're not sitting in fountain chatting. That's another reason I just like using /mute all. The chat is so destructive. Mindfulness on the loading screen. This is the last point, but it's super important. Before every single game begins on the loading screen, you need to be reminding yourself of two things. Number one, even if you're on your best champion and you're really in the zone, chances are your win rate isn't over 60%, which means there's a huge chance you are going to lose this game. Do not be frustrated if you do. If you remind yourself before the game begins, hey, there's a huge chance, 40% or more, that I will lose this game, you'll realize that you don't get frustrated anymore when you see that defeat screen because you knew there was a very good chance it could happen. It doesn't mean that you're not climbing, doesn't mean you're not playing well, it just means natural variance. The other thing is, remind yourself there's a very real chance somebody will be feeding this game, somebody will be AFK this game, and don't be frustrated when it happens. If you get frustrated because somebody AFKs or feeds, one of two things is going on. Either A, you didn't expect that somebody would feed or AFK, in which case you're just not very bright. I mean, why would you not expect that? It happens all the time. Or number two, you are saying that you believe you should have your wins spoon-fed to you and that you should get AFKs less than everybody else. In other words, you're saying you're not good enough to climb like everybody else does. So that's why it's so irrational to get upset when somebody AFKs or somebody feeds. It's just a part of the game. Yes, it does take away some of the fun, but it's definitely not anything to get mad about. Alright guys, and just a quick look at champion picks here to wrap up this video. If you are a gold or platinum player, you should be picking these champions. And of course, I'll link you to the full list below. This is on op.gg. The reason why you want to pick these champions is because, yes, we know that building up strategic asymmetries increases our win rate. Building up mechanical asymmetries increases our win rates. But if you pick a champion who organically has a very high win rate in a certain elo, then you are going to climb even faster. Let's say that over the next month, you build up a 10% win rate on one champion. Would you want to do it on Nunu Support, who has a 40% win rate, or would you want to do it on Malzahar, who has a 55% win rate? The answer, obviously, Malzahar, because if you do it on Nunu Support, you may only be going from a 40% win rate to a break-even win rate, whereas on Malzahar, you may climb multiple leagues during that time period because you'll be up at a 65% win rate. That's why champion pick is so important. If I were a bronze player, you can pick Vel'Koz, you can pick Brand. If you hit more skill shots than the average Vel'Koz player in bronze, which is not hard to do with a little practice, if you CS better than the average Vel'Koz player in bronze, you will take this 53% win rate and add 10% onto it. You'll be up to 63. All you have to do is do better than the average player at your elo on your champion, and you will start at this win rate, and you will increase upwards from there. That's why it's so important to pick a strong champion. So that's the end of this video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I'll be back with another one shortly, and until then, peace out.